here at the Center for European Policy Studies, and I will be moderating this discussion on a very pressing topic, which is European defense. And in particular, today we are going to explore how a roadmap towards common European defense may look like, based on a very recent study of my colleague, Steven Blockmans, Associated Senior Research Fellow at CEPS. So Steven will present this study for the first time on this very special occasion, so we will have a chance to hear directly from him about study outputs. And then we will have a discussion by the great panelists. We have with us member of the European Parliament, Rainer van Lanschot, and Emmanuel Jacob, president of the European Organization of Military Associations and Trade Unions, Euromil. But of course, before we will open the discussion, I wanted to just note and acknowledge that the study was born thanks to the support of CHARGE, which is the independent research platform of Volt Netherlands, which focuses on two domains, democratic renewal and European integration. And today we have with us the director of CHARGE, Barry van der Molen. And I would like to ask Barry to come to open the floor with introductory remarks and tell us about the motivation behind commissioning the study to CEPS.
Yes, thanks, Tina. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Also, on behalf of CHARGE Research Platform Volt, it's my great pleasure to welcome you all today. First of all, though, a warm thank you to everyone here at CEPS and to Steven in particular, not only for hosting us here in Brussels, but also for immediately seizing the opportunity to embark on this research project with us. And I would like to use these remarks to share a bit of the background about who we are at CHARGE, how this project came to be, and why we believe it matters so much both to Volt but also to Europe. CHARGE, like Tina already mentioned, is the research platform for pan-European political movement Volt, and it might be good in this context to underline what that means exactly. We are not a political party think tank in the traditional sense. We are set up as an independent sister institute to Volt with our own mission and mandate. Now, the mission is straightforward, but never easy. We try to connect science and politics, and we aim to bring academic insights and expert views into the political arena, translate them into something usable, and build a sturdy knowledge foundation for long-term policy making. And in our work, we focus, like Tina mentioned, on two central themes: democratic renewal and European integration. For us, these two themes belong together. Europe's future depends on renewing democratic legitimacy at all levels. The project that led to the study today about European defense cooperation presented primarily falls under the domain of European integration, but there is a link to democratic renewal and legitimacy as well. As European citizens deserve decisions about security and defense that are taken with legitimacy, transparency, and accountability. Defense cooperation must be embedded in a broader vision of European integration that strengthens our democracy. So Volt has advocated the idea of a European army for years, not because it's a good slogan for a pan-European party, but because European security can only be guaranteed if we act together. Now, this idea of a so-called European army raises many questions and often some eyebrows too. But the questions motivated us to commission this study, as we felt that thorough research into the possibilities and challenges here would strengthen Volt's stance. And we'll find out today if this is what's happened. And why is this even more important today? I'm sure I don't need to go into detail with this room, with this audience, to underline that Europe is, and it has been described so often and very well by Steven in the study, at a crossroads. The world around us is becoming more dangerous and more unpredictable every day. So what was our ambition with the study? The project was aimed to work towards a realistic, science-based roadmap that comes as close as possible to that aspiration of a European army, while fully acknowledging the political, strategic, and institutional realities. And this is what led us to CEPS. This project represents, in that way, the core of our mission by facilitating the necessary research and helping these insights find their way into the political debate and ultimately political decision-making. A little bit of background about how the study developed. We began in December last year, and from the start we were very conscious that this study should not be produced in an ivory tower. Instead, we really aimed for a strong connection to the actual political questions, and therefore we organized several political check-ins in which Stephen had a chance to communicate with the political stakeholders. And since you all know, since December, the geopolitical context shifted continuously rapidly. There were new developments in security, in EU politics, in global affairs almost every week, sometimes literally every day. And this challenge makes these check-ins quite relevant, because the foundation of the study seemed to change by the day. In this process, we worked closely with VOLT's national parliamentary group in the Netherlands and our delegation in the European Parliament. This was a really cool, inspiring, collaborative effort, and it hopefully made sure that the recommendations of the report are useful both in The Hague and in Brussels. While this project was born out of this political need, it was obviously conducted with full scientific independence. I guess this goes without saying, as everyone in this room knows about SEP's outstanding reputation, but I still wanted to underline that. Cannot be stressed enough. We did not want a party policy paper. We did not want political steering of the conclusions. What we wanted was independent research that could serve as a credible foundation for political debate in VOLT and hopefully also beyond. Tomorrow, Stephen is actually presenting this paper to the VOLT's defense community as well, and there will be this discussion inspired by it afterwards, and I think this is a really great example of these findings already leading to discussion in the party. So thank you, Stephen, for committing to that as well. But now back to today. I'm very happy to say that Stephen is presenting this roadmap that sketches a vision for Europe's future in defense cooperation while outlining concrete and feasible steps based on scientific analysis. And I also wanted to say, I'm not a policymaker or a politician, but I am also personally deeply convinced of this urgent need to come together as the EU to develop a long-term strategic plan for our security. And I really genuinely hope that this study can inspire new ways of thinking and ultimately action as well. So finally, a very brief word of gratitude to all of our speakers, our moderator, but also to Marieke Blanke for coordinating the study with great eye for detail, and to Peter Knoper for being our external advisor in this process, and most of all to all of you in the room. It's a full room. Thank you for engaging with us on this topic. I think it shows how urgent and how relevant this debate is. I look forward to the discussions ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barry. Stephen, yep.
Okay, well, expectations raised. Now the question will be whether they can be met. Spoiler alert, I am not of the opinion that the EU army is going to materialize anytime soon. But I do see a need for a form of it, as you will see later on. First of all, thank you, Tina, for the introduction. Thank you, Barry, Marieke, the kind people of charge, of course, for a very smooth, fruitful cooperation. Thank you, Peter Knoop, indeed, for your wisdom and advice. And of course, to all the interviewees who were kind enough to share their time with me over the last 6 months in getting a reality check from the officialdom as well. NATO, EU, national administrations, the militaries, and other stakeholders, as they say that. So I've gone around with my microphone and have tried to do justice to the accumulated progressive insights that I've gained over, indeed, a very tumultuous first half of 2025. I no longer live in Brussels, and so each time I come, I sniff the air, and maybe you've noticed, but it smells of gunpowder a little bit. There's so much talk going on about European defense. The developments are going so quickly, and they certainly have been at the European level in the last 6 months, with initiative after initiative, with, of course, now the view to a multi-annual financial framework where defense ought to be fitted in a meaningful way, so as to be able to deter, if not repel, any threat that might be posed by the great powers. In fact, I will not go into a lengthy geopolitical analysis. It is pretty clear to everyone in this room what I mean when I say that Europe is essentially in a double bind. It is, of course, facing Russia's aggression against Ukraine, to which our own security is inextricably linked, and this has been stated ample time by our leadership. Russia, which is being supported by China. There's the Kremlin's shadow war, of course, against many of our countries, much of the rest of Europe. And then we have the second Trump administration's veiled threats, or perhaps not so veiled, against NATO allies, and its intention, of course, to withdraw military capabilities from Europe. So all of that has pushed Europe, not just the EU, also the UK, in various forms towards an inflection point for defense integration. And in a way, well, there's hardly been a better time to forge a common defense for Europe. This is how the phrase that I would like to use and that I've employed also throughout the study. This is the common defense is not an empty federalist slogan. It is treaty language, and not just a preamble. It is Article 24, paragraph 1, that basically prescribes member states' ambition to progressively frame their defense in a common fashion, all the way to a common defense. Okay. And so what we see is lots of development, of course, in terms of the adoption of financial instruments, thoughts about new European projects so as to fill capability shortfalls, etc. But what is lacking to a great extent is the vision. Where are we going with all of this? And without having established that vision, I think it is very hard to keep oneself on track or be subject, essentially, to forces both within and external, and try and ride those waves. And so this study tries to do just that, to try and define what a common defense for Europe might look like. And given the pressures that Europe is under, in particular, you know, the public revelations by some of our military chief intelligence officers that Russia might test our resolve in the next 2 to 3 years, then we ought to take this seriously. If we can't, you know, believe then, who can we believe, right? So there is urgency involved. And so the timeline which was projected for this study, for this roadmap, is one in 2 parts until the end of the decade, which more or less coincides with the current European administrative and legislative cycle, and then to 2035, 10 years from now, which more or less coincides with the next multi-annual financial framework, which should be fitted, of course, to deter and repel if need be. So the study does not present a heavy methodological justification for foresight analysis. We have not gone through all the forks in the road as far as eventualities, you know, black swans, gray rhinos, and all of that is concerned. Rather, the study rests on a series of assumptions that Europe will have to, as the Americans would say, keep up their own pants in security and defense, and that we therefore need to shore up our strategic autonomy, much touted phrase in this town, in defense. So what might it look like? And here, bless you, the starting point is, I think, then an acknowledgement of what our strengths, weaknesses, the threats and opportunities are. I will not go in detail through all of them. Let me just focus on the opportunities here. We know the threats are plenty. We know that we still have some strengths, both in the operational sense, in the industrial sense. We know that we have many weaknesses with deeply fragmented defense markets, with deeply fragmented militaries. But what are the opportunities? Okay, the external pressures, of course, have shaped a political climate that ought to be, and opportunities, therefore, that ought to be seized politically. Is this happening? Rhetorical question. There is an increase in defense spending. Not sure if you saw the data which have been published by the European Defence Agency earlier this week, which project the type of increases in billions of euros into what it would mean if indeed each of those NATO allies commit to the new spending target reached at the Hague summit of 5%. That's an enormous amount of money. How are we going to spend it? And better spend it, smarter spend it. There is a simplification agenda going on, which is pushed, of course, by the European Commission, just to raise European competitiveness broadly, and they're looking for ways also to cut red tape, call it that way, a popular phrase, in the area of defense and to harmonize standards. Defense industrial integration of Ukraine is in principle decided. Ukraine is the laboratory of defense industrial innovation at the moment, and the European Union's collective has acknowledged that it is in the mutual strategic interest to integrate and accelerate that integration of the Ukrainian defense industry into the single market of the European Union. There is variable geometry, there's flexibility in governance models that could be applied along the way towards that common defense. There is outside of the European Union, but with EU member state participation, of course, a coalition of the willing happening to shore up a sort of operational capacity, which seems to be impossible to mount in the context of CSDP, Common Security and Defense Policy, at the level it would be needed, to have that reassurance force and deterrence force in Ukraine. And of course, we have plenty of new defense partnerships left and right. The UK in the making, Japan, Canada, like-minded countries around the world. Those are some of the opportunities, by way not, this is not an exhaustive list, as you will see. Very quickly, the EU's institutional responses up until now have been plenty, mainly in the financial instrument sphere. You see an alphabet soup there. Some of you will be familiar with the European Defence Fund, with the Act in Support of Ammunition Production, ASAP, with the European Defence Industry Reinforcement through Common Procurement Act, a whole mouthful, EDIRPA. These are gap fillers, basically, under the current MFF. What's to be played for is a sizable chunk, of course, in the next MFF. The European Defence Fund allows for funding of purely military capabilities, whereas some of the other funds are, of course, more civil, dual use in nature. The European Peace Facility was touted as a major innovation. Of course, it existed prior to Russia's full-scale invasion, and was mobilized in volumes of euros, reimbursed to member states that send lethal aid to Ukraine, which was unprecedented. But it's been blocked now by Hungary already for, what, a year and a half? So of little use. PESCO, yeah, again, a laboratory of all kinds of 75 now projects where you have modular composition of member states participating, but it's lagging behind the initial ambitions that have been laid out, even acknowledged by the institutions this year. This is, of course, not all. If you look at it, at the European integration effort at the moment, then I think you have this inverted pyramid where harmonization of standards, could be done quite broadly, but you narrow down to the innovation environment in the end. The R&D, prototyping, and exploitation of new equipment that will win us the next war. I mean, investments in drones sounds nice, but everyone and their grandma are now producing drones. What is needed is, well, anti-jammer, drone jamming devices. Yes, von der Leyen's plane over the weekend will have hammered home the need for anti-jamming, anti-spoofing type of equipment as well. Although the military people will tell you that this is really more around intelligence-based gathering early warning systems rather than taking out the source of the jam that happens. But so if you look at it, then all of these instruments, they offer in the traditional single market type of integration a legislative platform which is quite wide, but where on the sharp end of industrial innovation, Europe is a small player, as we know, certainly on the global market, and where in the short run we simply have to buy the stuff elsewhere if we want to be able to deter Russia from what our military intelligence chiefs are saying, a pinprick type of event. Any type of R&D and production will probably only come by 2035, and then the larger military platforms, of course, take a generation to be developed. But this is therefore a moment, also an opportunity to take, very decisive, smart action, but of magnitude, right? You see a picture here of a big bazooka. Mario Draghi's, reference to saving the Eurozone might well apply, in the defense sphere at the moment. I mean, this is basically a quote from the current High Representative. The response so far in terms of sizable instruments has been around the ReArm initiative that von der Leyen presented whilst our CEPS Ideas Lab was going on. A fictitious figure of 800 billion, which kind of resonates with Mario Draghi's competitiveness report headline figures, but which, as we know, in the loans structure provides a safe regulation for 150 billion, where sign-ins have apparently happened and money will be dispersed. That might create a kind of, Europeanized, more galvanized, transnational type of effort for production. But I wonder where it will be enough in order to move the needle really on defragmenting the markets and the armies. What is needed is a more systemic type of ecosystem type of revolution in this sense. And I would also say that as far as future development of the European Union in defense is concerned, ultimately hard choices will have to be made. Along the trilemma that I depicted here, so far, with the money that is being spent nationally primarily to meet 5% targets in NATO, and only to a limited extent in the European context, some hard choices have been made by some political leaders. Said, okay, we have to accept some budgetary choices here as to what, social protection schemes, for example. There are trade-offs in national budgets. There may be new tax hikes in the offing. Another compromise which has already been accepted in a way is what to buy from whom, which hardware to procure, essentially, in the short term. The Turnberry Summit, Trump's golf course in Scotland, was a perfect example of that kind of trade-off. Don't want to steer it into the direction of that particular summit in particular, but it does go to show that we are vulnerable as a European Union and have to make compromises. But why not compromise? And I don't think it's a compromise, actually. I think it's a logical solution for transnational, indeed supranational arrangements to have a more efficient and effective defense posture as a collective, why not discuss ceding the exercise of sovereign powers in defense? I understand that this requires treaty change, right? If you want the European Union to be more active on territorial defense, for example, which is the remit of NATO, okay, then we can tinker around the margins now, and you'll see some suggestions in a moment. But to go much further into protecting at least part of our territory, we will have to eventually cede, member states will have to accept that they will have to cede the exercise of sovereign rights. The core of the study, and food for discussion later, is around 8 governance models which are inspired by historical existing forms of governance as they might be applied or enhanced for the European Union on the way to a common defense for the European Union. And to inform the quadrants that you see here, a couple of guiding questions are absolutely key to be posed. Well, when we speak about a common defense, do we mean that national militaries ought to be replaced by a European one or be supplemented by it? I'm not saying that this is a binary choice. In time, there may well be blurry boundaries between those, or this might be a gliding scale, so to speak. A second question will be, okay, in terms of decision making, do we accept a form of qualified majority democratic decision making, or is this going to be run by unanimity? And thirdly, is this going to require a mandatory participation of member states, or rather voluntary one in a coalition within the European Union context? And the fourth question, which is added to the paper as well, of course, is, are these models compatible with NATO? Because what is quite striking, I find, is that in all of the discussion we've had in the first half year of 2025, it is astounding to note the remarkable degree of consensus on across Europe that there is no alternative to NATO. And so even in its own plans to ramp up defense readiness for 2030, the joint white paper which was published in March of this year, it's quite clear that the European Union's institutional leadership pegs that future readiness onto NATO. And so, okay, that's a political choice. Even France, which has been touting European strategic autonomy for years, accepts that this is NATO. So that the alliance remains the bedrock of collective defense. That comes with certain consequences, of course. Certainly in the next 5 to 10 years, it'll be hard to decouple from NATO, or indeed do anything without NATO support or buy-in. So these are the overriding questions that the study has posed in order to then investigate the organizational, the legal, the financial, and the operational viability of each of those models. And you can see that they range from an EU army, I'd say on one extreme, because you're talking in its maximalist sense at least about replacing national militaries, which in my interviews I find no one to support that idea. The idea of a 28th army, so to speak, okay, that becomes a bit more reasonable. But then we're talking about supplementing national tasks already, not just merely replacing them, unless there are certain tasks that national militaries decide can be better done at European level. Yes, then you have a kind of a 28th army in that upper quadrant as well, where decision-making happens by democratic voting procedures, majorities, therefore, not unanimity. I've called there the EDA plus, which is perhaps a bit of a misnomer. What I meant to say is, I mean, the European Defence Agency at the moment is an organization that assists member states in essentially their procurement of military equipment. But it's not a procurement agency per se. It does not buy the stuff, right? But why not think about an agency that might be able to do that? And so in the industrial sphere, there exists the example of Galileo, which is an EU-owned legal entity that operates together with the European Space Agency, a network of satellites which have a dual spectrum, civilian developed and military not inactivated, but where you could think of, this is one of the many European defense projects of common interest that have been, a list that is in the making, whereby European satellites with military capability would have to be operated and owned by the European Union. There is a precedent, and so you can think along those lines of replicating this type of, well, supranational model in a way. I think there's more music, so to speak, on the industrial track rather than on the operational one.
2 minutes.
2 minutes, I'm nearly there. Some of the other examples that I just wanted to flag are obvious pioneering groups of an intergovernmental decision-making nature, replacing some tasks, or indeed a PESCO plus type of arrangement, which would supplement such tasks. I think it is eminently reasonable to accept that along the way to 2035, such models, governance models, might be used for elements of defense operational or defense industrial capacity building. Where I don't see much promise is in upgrading CSDP towards a common defense, because it remains vulnerable to to the sluggishness of the entire process that we are already facing right now. I don't see much merit in trying to revive a European defense community, the one of the 1950s. It has been offered as an idea. It was ratified by 4 states. France famously did not ratify it after the Plan Plévin suggested it, the French proposal. But the Assemblée Nationale did not ratify it, and Italy, which was last in the row, also did not ratify it, but it has never been abrogated. So the idea has been, okay, why don't we just resuscitate this thing? Okay, slightly different geopolitical context, European context. So yes, we looked at it, parked it. The idea of a European stability mechanism for defense, touted by a sister think tank whose name shall not be mentioned, but has an annual meeting today, is an attractive idea, but stumbles, in my view, on 2 issues. One, democratic legitimacy. If indeed the ESM, the European Stability Mechanism, is anything to go by as a precedent in trying to resolve the Grexit, the specter of Grexit from the Eurozone, then the complaint was twofold in a democratic sense. The Greeks felt that they were being overruled by the Germans and had no say in it. I'm synthesizing my messaging. And the Germans thought, well, why are we paying for the Greeks? This is one. And 2, defense is not the same as a single currency. We're talking about lives of people here. And this is so entrenched in national psyche and sovereignty that it would be very difficult to pool that at supranational level so as to replace tasks without that democratic backstop. That is why we've parked it as well. There is some merit in exposing the European Border and Coast Guard, which is perhaps a controversial idea if you come to think of the problems that Frontex is beset with at the moment. It had a scandal over its previous chief executive. Of course, human rights violations, which have been documented left and right. There is a review, I think, ongoing by the European Commission on the operation of Frontex, and it is clear that this agency needs to be reformed. Well, if you do, then think about what it might mean for a common defense. We're talking here about coast and border guards that are equipped, certainly be equipped with heavier military-grade material, so as to patrol our external borders, land borders, airports, ports. That is a limited form of territorial defense, which is already possible under the treaty. And so create a sort of EU Marine Corps for the European Union by seizing the opportunity that the Frontex review presents against this entire backdrop. This is one of the proposals of the paper. So you see that there are a couple of governance models, both in the operational as well as in the industrial field, that can be used along the way towards common defense. This is probably too small lettering to read, but essentially the steps that are being taken have to be organizational, financial for sure, so as to create the type of governance framework that is then needed to operationalize. And so the operational elements of it come a bit later and are then honed. I think one final comment here is that with the impending entry into force of the European Defence Industrial Programme, EDIP, which is in trialogue at the moment. The European Parliament is more or less signed off on it. Council is discussing it with member states. Hopefully they'll reach an agreement by the end of this year. There are some really interesting supranational elements there that ought to be used, triggered quite quickly, I think, over a supply crises, over several supply crises which affect the defense industry, and where a European Defense Industrial Readiness Board, again, a mouthful, but essentially an agency that will be able to advise the European Commission and the Council, indeed, to take steps of an emergency nature, supply crises, to address them and to organize industry in such a way so as to plug the shortfalls as they exist. That is an extremely potentially powerful tool to be triggered, creating precedents and spillover. That's it from my side. Apologies for having been too long.
Thank you so much. The study has a lot of insights. So study has a lot of insights. If you have not had a chance to read it yet, you can find it on the SEPS website. It reads very well, and I strongly encourage you to read about it. But Steven, before we open up with the panel, and also let me flag that we will surely have time, last half an hour, for the audience, so stay with us for your comments and questions. Just to make it very clear for the people who have not yet read the study, which one, from your opinion, is the most feasible until within this decade, 2025 and 30, if there is one model if you could pick up, and which one would be preferable?
No, so as I mentioned, I mean, we're talking about several domains here, right? You need to create this ecosystem. The military would say the .mil PFP acronym, doctrine, organization, training, material, intelligence, the whole lot needs to be covered at European levels. The governance models that I showed have potential in some of these domains. We didn't discuss training. It's quite obvious that, military academies, which are now operating in splendid isolation, there's some cooperation, but, gradually converge to what we already have in the diplomatic field, the European Diplomatic Academy. So all of these elements basically need to be covered. And so when you talk about operational territorial defense, the Border and Coast Guard, as I mentioned, has potential. In the industrial sphere, I mentioned the Readiness Board, which we're waiting for. And on the operational field, I'm afraid we externally, so there I'm afraid we'll have to rely on pioneering groups. That's the reality we're faced with at the moment in the short to medium term.
Thank you so much, Rainer. Your takes right away.
Thanks a lot. And let me all thank you for being here on this day, and start by expressing my gratitude towards Charles, Barry, and Marieke in particular, but also towards Seps and Steven in particular, because this is the first real substantial study that I've seen that covers the roadmap towards a common defense for Europe. And that is highly needed. I've been active in politics for about 7 years now, and since the foundation of Volt, we have been in favor of a European army, but usually the debates around that topic are immediately cut off by people that dismiss the idea entirely as unrealistic. In those 7 years, the need has obviously increased a lot, and through that, the perception of this in society. But we also still see a lot that it keeps on being dismissed. And I really would like the entire public debate to progress towards what should it look like and how are we going to get there. And I think this is a beautiful first step. So I think that deserves a first big round of applause for you. Thank you for creating it. And then actually, one of the things, I had prepared some notes that I wanted to say, but the thing that came to mind while sitting here, looking another time at the trilemma, is that we have the trilemma, and in one of the dilemmas in the trilemma is ceding sovereignty. But my view is actually that we would only cede the illusion of sovereignty. Because if you look at the nation states in Europe, there's only either small countries or countries that haven't realized yet that they are small, like France. And that realization needs to happen, because we can pretend that we are so sovereign in some aspects, but you only have to look at what happened the last summer to realize that actually it's an illusion of sovereignty. So I think ceding that would actually increase the amount of ownership that we have on our future. So that's the first thought on the trilemma. The other three things I quickly want to remark is that a European army has become increasingly desired by the European people. Recent public opinion polls show that 3/4 of Europeans are in favor of this, half of the Dutch people, and they probably will not really care about the exact details of how it's operationalized, but they do see the logic that we are only strong when we are together. And experts are also starting to spread that message more and more, but in politics, I'm not really seeing it. And if we looked at the SWOT analysis, the O of opportunity had a little annex that said a small window of opportunity. And I have an anecdote to highlight that. So directly after the betrayal of by Trump of Zelensky in the White House, we were working on a common vision, a white paper on the future of European defense with the European Parliament. And I had the responsibility for the Greens to negotiate that. And it was a crucial time to discuss with the European Parliament, where do we want to go? And I have a very far-reaching vision of European defense integration going all the way towards a European army. In practice, you need majorities, so we would not get that in entirely, but we did get a sentence which looked very much like the sentence in the treaty itself about more integration towards a fully common defense union. And there was a sentence that we fought hard for and that got a majority. It was adopted by the entire European Parliament. And I was celebrating this success. Wow, this is really a huge signal that Europe is going towards that direction. 1 month later, I'm in a similar negotiation room discussing an opinion that the Internal Market Committee is giving to the Defense Committee on EDIP, the European Defense Industrial Program that was also mentioned a couple of times here. And I start by saying, hey, that sentence that we adopted with the entire European Parliament 1 month ago, and it is based on this treaty that is the foundation of our entire union, let's put that in. And all of a sudden, we had to redo that entire negotiation because more nationalistic politicians didn't feel the need and the pressure as much as they felt it before, and it didn't end up in the final opinion that we created. So the anecdote, I'm telling this because I see that the urgency is within the minds of politicians not high enough. Sometimes something happens, it increases a bit, but it immediately dissipates again towards national Pavlov reactions and back towards a position where the only way of looking at defense is along national lines. And I think that is a real threat to our security, because if we stay stuck in that national dogma, we will not create the deterrence we need. And European citizens see that. I'm giving a very long remarks. I have a lot more, but maybe I should stop here, or can I continue?
No, you can continue. Maybe you can also
Okay.
tell us if you find which of the models, as a politician, as a member of the European Parliament, you would prioritize.
Yes.
Which one would gain the most citizens, support? I
Yes.
think what I hear here is Common European Army. That's something
Yes.
citizens would support.
I think the reason why so many people answered yes to that opinion poll is because they realize that we're stronger together. But if you would ask European citizens, are you in favor of fully integrating our armies into a European one that then the European Commission could decide on whether it's deployed or not, most people will say no. So I think the reason why people say yes to that question, I've mentioned a few times, they want a stronger Europe, and there are options in these models that could already get us there quickly. So the 28th Army, sort of as a supplement to the national armies, is one of them. We need another 250,000 soldiers if the threat of the US troops retreating from Europe becomes a reality. So in order to create that as quickly as possible, you could, for example, try to focus on those brigades by making multinational units that form sort of an umbrella towards on top of the national armies. The other thing that is a first step that is the most logical, and which I think we should be able to get majorities for, is joint procurement of strategic enablers. Think of intelligence, think of satellite systems. There are systems or air defense systems that they are so expensive that single small countries cannot, and also bigger countries cannot fully buy them themselves and maintain them themselves. So these strategic enablers should be bought by the EU and maintained and also deployed by the EU. And I think that will immediately increase the deterrence that we have, increase our safety, and be an important step. So that would be, I think, the supplement supranational voluntary model. And the other one of creating a sort of on the basis of the model of Frontex, a European unit that can be deployed to support, for example, national armies, is a good one as well. So I really see a combination of these different models depending on what part of defense we're talking about.
Thank you so much. And Emmanuel, I think we need to also discuss very important things, which are the social aspects, right? You're the best place to tell us about, if we had to create the common European defense with all those elements that Stephen presented, the Rainiers then further highlighted, would the Union be ready, considering the social aspects?
First, also, thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks for this report. To be very clear from the point of view of my organization, umbrella organization of military associations and trade unions, which is not always the most loved partner in these kind of debates, we really applaud such study by the simple fact that it's not a study which I call sometimes the classical academic study. It's really a study where we see, okay, here we look at a lot of elements, and we also are looking at what can we use now in the future. I strongly believe that none of the 8 propositions single will be one in the years to come, but I'm sure that there are combinations. Secondly, the fact that we discuss now on so many levels and at so many places security and defense, it's, as already mentioned, it's very clear that this is now a top priority. If we look in the past, this was a discussion for the single interested ones. If you talk today with people not linked to the security sector, not linked to the defense sector, this is one of the topics they talk with you about. How do we continue with this in Europe? Can we really manage this? Are we under threat? Of course, Ukraine brought that on the table, but to be very fair, it was already before Ukraine also back on the table. So that is now really the right moment to continue that discussion. One last point before I go in the aspect of social affairs. We were quite hopeful when the new commission came in place and that the mandate given to the new defense commissioner was to come up within 100 days with a white paper on the future of European defense. Well, I challenge here the room to explain me where this future of European defense is in the white paper. The white paper, with all respect, and it's a great paper, but it's not a paper on the future of European defense. It's an industry and an investment paper. And with all respect for the commissioner, but it's not a defense commissioner, it's an industry commissioner. And I think we should be very clear on that. That's also what the member states want. The member states want clearly no involvement in what they do in that field from the higher level. We have seen that in the past days. Von der Leyen said a few things on the engagement of the military in the future in the field of Ukraine, once that there is peace, and she was called back immediately by the German defense minister. So this is very clear that we have a lot of challenges at that point. Now, social affairs, military personnel. Once again, what we appreciate here is that also for that aspect, there are elements in the study. Because as already mentioned, what we see very often now, to say almost all the time, is that this debate that is going on is a debate going on industry and on investment. Now, it's clear that I'm not saying that we don't need that, because without that we have the needed investments, without that we have material, it will not work. But we also have to turn things around. Without men and women dealing with that equipment and with that material, it will not work. You just mentioned we need 250,000 more for the future in case that the US troops are withdrawing. We need anyway, whatever happens, we need to invest in military personnel in the future. There is no country in Europe not having a problem since quite a while on recruitment and retention of military personnel. I often say there are two kinds of countries: those that have the problem and admit, and those that have the problem and don't admit. But every European country had that same problem. And just to show how this discussion is going on, when about a year ago, a little bit more than a year ago, we addressed the European Military Committee with this issue and said, wouldn't it be nice that we do on the European level, or the committee does on the European level, a study on that problem, based on an Irish study that we had. But Ireland has a little bit more than 1,000 officers, so the study is a little bit easier than for example, in Germany or in France or whatever. The answer of the EU Military Committee was very clear. We are not tasked to do that. It's very interesting, but we are not tasked and we cannot do that. We don't have the means for that. Now, most probably, in between, something was changing, because at a certain moment, October, early November, NATO did a meeting on recruitment and retention. And then suddenly on the 3rd of December last year, we could go to the EU Military Committee to launch the debate and give a presentation. Just to say on everybody is looking to everybody to finally decide how are we going. But one thing is clear, that aspect remains a national aspect. And if we want to continue towards whatever kind of European defense forces, I'm not saying it should be a European army, it should be a combination of strong countries. To be very clear on the examples that we have seen and the propositions, I think, and my organization think that something like the framework of Frontex, what we have today, that would be a starting point. Not really in favor to combine it with the current Frontex, but a kind of military organization based on the Frontex structures. And we will have the same debate that we had at the time with Frontex, where a lot of people said it will never happen that you have an EU agent. Well, the EU agents are there today. And those that say today you will never have a European Union soldier, there will be a European Union soldier in the future. And even if tomorrow they will not be there, we cannot deny that our people are no longer working in the national context. Military personnel is working in an international context. And so the fact that we base everything, I'm talking about, once again, recruitment, retention, but also working conditions, salary, compensation system, working time, which is a long-lasting discussion in defense forces. We have a European Union Working Time Directive. Yeah, why don't we implement that for every European soldier? Why should that be different for a French one, a German one, or a Dutch one? Because we have the framework directive. If you look at situations like where people are together in an international context, can be in headquarters, but can also be in operation, that's what people do. People start comparing. And they see that they all have different systems. Even on the level of management, this creates a lot of problems. And so we have to continue to deal and to work with that. My last point on that is when we then look EU-NATO, the discussion that we already had here, on everybody looks toward NATO, not so much towards the European Union. I find it always a bizarre discussion because we talk about the same men and women and about the same armed forces. It was the budget discussion was like that, but also now on how we are going to engage people in the future, how are we going to deal with that, is about the same men and women. The only difference is the top structures and the decision-making process. So why can't we go at a certain moment in a very clear direction on where we go with our people, how we deal with that, and how we engage on a European level our defense forces. And tomorrow we still will have Dutch armed forces, French armed forces. I'm convinced I'm a little bit older than the average of the room, but I still hope to see one day this European Union soldier in an active engagement, and not only with the supplement of his national flag on his shoulder, but only the European Union flag. Thank you.
Very ambitious. Thank you. And I think this is really the time to open the floor for the audience. The questions and comments, please raise your hands and introduce briefly yourselves. And we will bring you the microphone, right? Do we have the mic in the room? Sure. We have the question here, the lady on the second row.
Hi, my name is Whitney Clark. I'm from SENSENELEC, the European Standardization Organizations. So during the pandemic, we experienced a crisis of supply chains. And right now, everyone's talking about stockpiling. And I'm wondering how much of the EU has learned its lesson and will have the foresight to be able to create those supply chains in the future for defense. Is there an acknowledgement in the study that standards were an asset to that? And seeing that it is a big part of the study, will it also recognize that there's a need for greater stockpiling?
Thank you. Other questions in the room? Gentleman in the last row.
Thank you so much. My name is Martijn. I work for the European Commission on Economic and Financial Affairs. One of the things that I've been working on was the National Escape Clause for defense. So my question is about the trifecta that you have already been describing in the presentation. I foresee that in the future, if we're talking about support for this future of a European army, for example, as you clearly mentioned, some countries will have more money and will have lower debts and deficits to pay for these additional investments. My question is, how can we ensure that there will be support across the EU continuously and far in the future, even in countries where this may actually cause very difficult political decisions, such as cutting social security? Thank you.
Thank you so much. Other questions in the room? Okay, you'll have more time for thinking, and I think we will take these two questions. Shall we start by you, Rainer?
Yes, thanks. To start with the question from you, Martijn, thanks for asking. So I wasn't fully understanding, did you mean how can we make sure that there is support within European countries if one is attacked and the others need to come to aid, or in individual countries if social benefits need to be cut in order to pay for it? The latter, okay. So I think the green transition, I'm part of the Green Group, is an important example. Because I'm personally happy that we created a Green Deal and that we have ambition to become climate neutral. We just have to, again, look at last summer to see what the negative effects of climate change can be. However, the reality of the European Parliament at the moment and the European Commission and its member states is going in the opposite direction. We're trying to do damage control instead of trying to improve things, because the Green Deal is to in some cases, for the right reasons, altered a bit, but in many cases, just diminished without good reasons for it, and that hurts the ambition there. And why is that happening? Because the social mood in European society has also changed. And that is because many individual citizens have felt negative consequences and did not see the positive aspects of it. And that especially happens in the social groups that have less money to spend. If you're sipping your paper straw that isn't working well while you see private jets flying over your head, then obviously that's not going to increase the support you feel for the green transition. So my answer to your question is, we can make the same mistake if we don't watch out with this as well. And then the support will decrease, and in a couple of years, politicians will be in power that are not upholding the commitments we made. That is a big danger, and therefore I would say do not make it into a debate between guns or butter on your bread, as somebody described it, but create additional fiscal means. And for me, the best one is Eurobonds. I'm a big supporter of Eurobonds that would fill the largest part of the financial need we see now, instead of pushing it back to the national level and letting it hurt social welfare on that front. And I think that's the best way to keep support for these defense investments high. Then the question on stockpiling, I think maybe somebody else, is there somebody that would really like...
If you want to comment on it, please go ahead. And then...
I think I have the impression that that one of the lessons from COVID and the lessons from the amount of ammunition and drones that are being blown to pieces in the war in Ukraine and how long it's lasting, that it is creating an urgency for stockpiling more. And that we already see some of it happening, but I'm not an expert on that front. So I think maybe if one of the other panelists is, they can have a more detailed description.
Thank you. Let's go to Emmanuel.
I can surely not give on that latter one a detailed answer, and I don't know numbers. I don't know how it's well regulated or how it's now regulated. I just want to add on what you said, that there are lessons. And if we look at the fact that we have now, since a while, made public this preparedness strategy, it's not only based, of course, on the COVID period, it's also based on what is happening in Ukraine. It's based on what our North European countries are doing, Finland, Sweden, Norway. It's a combination of the total defense system that we have over there. But the preparedness strategy is for us a framework where that we see a kind of answer on. It's not only a military, and it's surely not a military discussion, it's a society discussion. And that's what makes it important, I think. And that's also the challenge that a lot of countries have. And I want to make the combination with what you said and this debate on military budgets, social affairs, and how do we deal with that. I think if we have the combination with preparedness strategy, making it a society debate and not only an expert debate on defense or security, because preparedness strategy is not defense and security. It's making sure that society is ready to give answers on crises, which can be all kinds of crises. It can be a COVID, can be wildfires, can be floods, can be whatever. All these things that we have seen, especially in the past years, where then the military was engaged, while it was not really their task. With this preparedness strategy, we can make a combination of all that discussion. I had this morning, before coming here, I had a debate with my colleagues of the police umbrella organization on the European level, or one of the police organizations, on the debate, and we will have the 24th of September, a debate on that. How do we deal together, military and police, with these things? But once again, it's not only looking towards us, it's looking towards everybody. And the link that I make with social affairs is that if we make this all a society debate, and not only a debate around Schuman or at the European Parliament, and then perhaps with a little bit of luck on the level of the national parliament, if it suits them well, because otherwise it's only blaming Brussels what we are going to do. Then we bring society in the debate, we bring our citizens in the debate, and that's the big challenge, explaining to our citizens in concrete, not just with PowerPoint or whatever, but in concrete terms, okay, why do we need to invest? How are we going to invest? But we continue also to deal with your social affairs, with your health system, with education system, and how are we going to combine that? And it's a challenge. It's a challenge. We should not say that, well, we can deal with that. If in Den Haag we had a discussion on, or a discussion, there was not a discussion, a decision on the 5%, which is 3.5 and 1.5, it's not 5%. Yeah, there is a cost. The money should come from somewhere. The euro is what the euro is. Suddenly you don't have more euros because we have this discussion. So also there we need to see how this will continue, but it will influence. It will influence. We should not try to hide it. We should go public with that and have a society debate and a society discussion. And then people at a certain moment, not everybody will accept what we are doing, but then people will more be open and accepting that we are spending money much more than ever before, and we need to get rid of those that only spread around that now we are going to buy planes, now we are going to buy ammunition. These kind of politicians we don't need. We need politicians with a broader view and open that debate and not purely an ammunition debate or plane debate or whatever.
And evidence-based research, I see the need for another study on that. But meanwhile, Stephen, do you have takes on the questions?
Yeah, I do. 3 quick points. Maybe we can have another round of Q&A then. The EU is a customer of arms and munitions. It's a difficult proposition in legal terms. At best, the European Union coordinates member states' acquisitions and stockpiling. It doesn't do it itself. Now, the Galileo example is a precious one, where a special legal vehicle basically allows for, and personality therefore allows for such stronger coordination and ownership, as I mentioned. Have lessons been learned from the COVID crisis in terms of supply chain crisis? One would hope so. I mean, there are the documents. So the administration has indeed, tried to investigate this with the help, of course, of the EDA. Much of this is happening anyway in the NATO context, with capability development plans, etc., where the prime locus for these discussions is for many of the member states anyway. So there, the knock-on effect of the European Union is twofold, comes from two directions anyway. But the treaty articles, 173 and 175 of the TFEU, if you want, they limit the role of the EU as a customer in that respect. Now, that could change, of course, with the change of the treaties. It might help also that the own resources decision were to be adopted or amended, which needs to happen at unanimity, which is therefore not easy and has not been tried also in order to stimulate, new the new safe regulation loan arrangements that have existed, which are in a way also a reflection or a lesson learned from the COVID crisis, right? Where a choice between the grant-based system of the Recovery and Resilience Fund was not chosen, but rather the SURE type of loan facility that was created and replicated in the SAFE instrument. In the end, by raising taxes through emission trading schemes or European taxes and raising, own resources, there may be, with treaty change, of course, a bigger role for the European Union to act as a customer. It will be increased under EDIP, its potential in the supply crisis, but to set it on a firmer footing for common defense, it would require more. Solidarity Fund, of course, might help in that respect, to offset some of the imbalances between member states' spending. But there too, you would probably need the golden formula, to create it. We look forward to what you come up with. A third point I wanted to make is in reaction to what Emanuele said on recruitment and retention. One of the weaknesses, obviously, well documented in several polls, is the unwillingness of Europeans to fight and die. Now, there are two solutions to this. Either reintroduction of draft in one form or another to make it attractive for a certain segment of population that could fight, and we see in Germany that debate going on in several other member states. A second one would, of course, be, you mentioned, we're dealing with the same people. There are all our boys and girls, basically, whether it's NATO or it's EU, same. Well, yes, but also no. I mean, I'm a lawyer. Yes, no. Why not create an EU Foreign Legion? These are not our people, sorry to say, although we would probably give them under an EU-wide golden passport scheme, not the one for Malta, which has been struck down, on national grounds only by the court. But as Radek Sikorski once said in private, there are plenty of people who out there who want to kick butt. Facilitate them, create a structure within the European Union where I have a Foreign Legion. Perhaps that's a provocative idea, but...
Which countries would that be, Steven, to start with?
Those would be traditionally people who see the merit of European citizenship, obviously, and who want to get an extra buck.
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I must react on that. First on that last proposal, I don't say immediately no, we shouldn't. I'm not sure that it will be acceptable, but I'm not saying really we should not do it. But if we do it in one way or another way, on the whichever form that we could invent, also then, and even then especially, we should make sure that we have a clear legal and social framework. I remember the discussion that was some years ago, several years ago, in the European Parliament on private military companies. And we proposed to amend that. I don't remember if it was a resolution. I think it was a resolution at the end. And we proposed an amendment via some members of the parliament to introduce there that also for these private military companies should be a social framework and a kind of monitoring system, just to avoid that at the end you use it as a kind of, yeah, I go far now, but mercenaries and do whatever you want them to do. That cannot be what we want. But in a nice, legal, correct framework, also under the correct working conditions, I think it's something that we should think about. Yeah, that was my first reaction.
Sure, Foreign Legion with a clearly defined social and legal framework. Last call for the questions in the room. Sure, we have two questions. Xavier, take this mic. So we have two gentlemen in the middle, and then in the last row, and one here. Okay.
Thank you, Xavier Nutin from the European Institute for Asian Studies. In one of the first slides that you show, Stephen, if I'm not mistaken, you said Ukraine is the laboratory for EU defense industrial integration, which I was a little bit shocked by that. And to me, it means that it's the EU interest to keep the war going as long as possible till the last Ukrainian dies. And it may explain why the EU is not willing to sit down on a table with the Russian side to discuss peace. So maybe you can elaborate on this industrial integration. And also I want just to quote, I think it was Prime Minister Tusk who said there was a kind of paradox when 450 million Europeans are begging 300 million Americans to protect them from 140 million Russians. The title here is Common Defense for Europe. And of course, that's the key issue, because we don't need to increase military budget. If we put together all the military budget for the 27 member states, all the ammunitions, all the weapons, we have more than the Russians. So we are here, some people are telling the citizens that they should give up their social programs to save money to buy American weapons to give to Ukraine because they don't have the political will to create a common defense. So it's very difficult. Here you talk about Eurobond, but I'm not prepared to buy a Eurobond if it is used to buy American weapon. So.
Thank you. Another question there in this row.
Hi, Milan Petit from the Systems Transformation Hub. Two questions relate to each other. One is on fiscal matters. Yes, in the past, obviously, you raise your debt, but you always almost raise income tax and wealth tax as a way of spreading solidarity for where does the money come from. What is the role here? And second, related to the first question about Ukraine, friends who are working in the drone industry said that yes, it's a laboratory, but what they really see is most European defense companies cannot innovate fast enough for modern warfare. Well, if you look at modern companies, these more startup-focused innovation companies, that is really pushing the envelope. And what they say, rather than continue the war, is how do you create a European innovation ecosystem that actually incentivizes this kind of quick iterative processes instead of drawn out acquisition of big weapon systems.
Thank you so much. Xavier, questions here?
Thank you. Manfred Sinton from Ruud Peterson's defense practice. I have a question going back a little bit to the EDA Plus and the PESCO Plus ideas, which is how much can actually be done under member state-led level. Going off of the current PESCO projects, for instance, success is limited, to say the least. Success is not there. The same thing goes for virtually everything else that's been member state-led, with the European battle groups to the RDC. How much can actually be done without having I mean, a frank conversation with the member states about you can't do this under the current structures? Or is there any movement on that specifically to Urania?
Thank you. I remember more questions in this part of the room. No, that was it. Okay, let's start taking them. Let's start with Rainer.
Thank you, Emmanuel.
Please be quick because we really are running out of time.
I think no one in their right mind wants the war in Ukraine to be prolonged to use as a laboratory. I also don't think that was the idea behind the slide. I for sure don't want that, and I think no one in their right minds want that. I also heard you mention that the EU is unwilling to go to the negotiations table to discuss peace. That's also, as far as I can tell, not true. I think the EU and Ukraine foremost wants peace as quickly as possible, but peace does not mean surrender, because that is what Putin's understanding of peace is, and surrender means a prolongation of war, but through occupation. And Ukraine has an awful history with Russian occupation and Russian aggression. So for Ukrainians, ending this war by surrendering, it might stop the killing at the front line, but it will continue in a horrible way with suppression, as we also seen in the occupied territories. So that's why peace, sustainable and lasting peace in Ukraine should come from Russian losses and Russian getting out of Ukraine. Oh, and fiscal matters, I think, yes, on fiscal matters, yes, I would say a wealth tax is needed. That's also in our policies as Volt. I wouldn't increase income tax because they're already very high, but wealth tax definitely. And also the EU's own ability to raise taxes. For example, a carbon tax that would allow the biggest polluters to also pay the most tax. And that's how I would not only do it with Eurobonds, but accompanying it with those measures. And these innovation hubs that you mentioned, yes, they are very needed. I would like to see that we create a different set of rules for just like you've seen in the United States, there's a different set of rules and investment possibilities for defense innovations, and those should happen in Europe as well. And then lastly, the limited success of PESCO. Yeah, I see that too, and we talked about it a bit before this meeting, that the more possibilities there are for member states to get involved in the decisions on whether something will be actually implemented or not, the more moments there are that the thing we want doesn't end up from happening. We just need to look at the European Peace Facility and how Hungary has been blocking that for the past 1.5 years to see an example. And that's why I would say go with smaller groups of countries and don't wait for unanimity, but start leading with smaller groups and then others will follow.
Thank you so much. Emmanuel?
Yep. 3 very short ones. First on Ukraine. I think nobody wants more urgent peace than Ukrainian people. I will be next week in Kiev for a full week. I train now since the last 3 weeks with the app at night to see how much I need to get out of bed. There will not be too much sleep. I can agree. I can assure you. And these people are living 3 years under that. But there is a big but, and the but is that nobody in Ukraine will accept peace if peace means that they have to give away their land and their territory. They will not do that, even if it's a political decision. That's very clear. On PESCO, well, PESCO, I cannot make. I'm not a politician. I cannot make a political point of PESCO, but one thing is very clear. PESCO was one of these things that came up where we were suddenly very excited. It was new, it brought people together, that was at least what it was meant. It brought the resources from our defense forces together. We would do much better. We see today that and I'm sure that there are positive points coming out of PESCO, but it's not what we hoped that it would bring at a certain moment. And unfortunately, I think we have the same problem with the rapid deployment capacity. We all thought that this year the rapid deployment capacity would be the new thing. Nobody talks about the rapid deployment capacity. And a very last one, that's going back to what Steven said. You mentioned the draft as one of the perhaps solutions and discussions. It's not a point of view of my organization because we simply don't manage to get a view of the organization. But for me, draft is no solution. The only thing that conscription draft will bring is that you hire your numbers and that you say, oh, you see, we have again 100,000 soldiers more, but it's only on numbers. Investing in reserve, I think that that's the real future that we need to go. And also that could be a European challenge and not only a national.
Thank you so much to you, Steven. And there is one question that has not been answered so far. The no need to increase the defense spending. If we would bring together all the budgets, we would still be higher than Russia.
Yeah, right. That is probably true. And again, I mean, to make the earlier point, there will be so much money coming online that it will have to concentrate minds as how to invest in projects that no single member state can do alone. And it's the definition of those European defense projects of common interest, which will be increasingly important, in the remainder of this year. There have been a lot of allusions to, the creation of an air shield, the cyber shield, and all of that. An air shield, estimations vary between, a couple of billion euros to a couple of 100 billion euros to do it properly, to have an Iron Dome of sorts. There are plenty of ideas, and in particular in the strategic enablers, as Reinier has mentioned already, where the money that is already there can be spent in a much smarter way. But it requires a willingness, of course, of ministries of defense to pool this. And yes, we have discussed, the social, environmental trade-offs in that respect. So I won't repeat it. I want to pick up one final point which relates to your last question. The whole lead nation, framework nation, focus area type of approaches have not produced the type of results that have been expected, neither in NATO context nor in EU context. So what is the way forward then? I would entrust it to experts, frankly, to define member states and industry, to define basically what ought to be developed again in this, to serve the European public good. I think that would be another, key criterion basically to define those really big projects that no single member state can do on their own, but where there's a clear need to invest and to harmonize and build the modern army of tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Steven. Thank you all for all the comments. I'm very happy to say that we started with a full room and we are ending with a full room, despite that we ran out of the time. That only signals very, very high interest in this topic. So thanks again, Steven, for this very timely and insightful report. Thank you all for the comments, and thank you all for being with us and for all the pertinent questions. Until next time.
And thank you for moderating.